Hello and welcome to her revenge arc. My name is Alara and tonight I invite you to listen, not to a tale of fiction, but to the architecture of a life meticulously built, and just as meticulously dismantled. The story I am about to share is my own. It is a quiet story in many ways. There are no car chases, no screaming matches in the rain. The violence was of a different sort, silent, digital, and corrosive to the soul. It is a story about the man I loved, the man I called my husband, and the discovery that his heart was a hollowed-out room, its walls papered with the pain of strangers. And it is the story of how I, a woman who found solace in the hushed aisles of a library, learned to orchestrate a symphony of consequences. So find a comfortable place, dim the lights, and let us begin. It is a peculiar thing to look back at happiness. It is like watching a film of your own life where you are the only one who doesn't know the ending. The scenes are so bright, so saturated with the light that, in retrospect, feels almost artificial. My happiness with Leo was like that. It was a masterpiece of domestic bliss, a curated collection of perfect moments that I treasured like rare first editions. We lived in a restored brownstone in a neighborhood where the trees were older and wiser than the residents. Our home was my sanctuary. I had filled it with books, with the scent of old paper and new ink, with the warm glow of amber-shaded lamps. I am an archivist, you see. My life's work is the preservation of stories, the careful handling of fragile histories. I find a profound peace in the order of the past, in cataloging, in understanding the provenance of things. It was a skill set that, at the time, seemed purely academic. I had no idea it would one day become my only weapon. Leo was, by all accounts, the perfect man. He was the kind of man other women's husbands were compared to, much to their detriment. He was a partner at a successful tech firm, a place that prided itself on its forward-thinking, inclusive culture. He was handsome in a way that felt both classic and modern, strong jaw, eyes the color of a stormy sea that could soften in an instant, and a smile that seemed to generate its own light. He was publicly, vocally a feminist. He championed women in his workplace. He'd quote bell hooks at dinner parties. He would march with me for women's rights, his hand held firmly in mine. He would say with a sincerity that I never thought to question, "Alara, the world is still so tilted against you. It's the duty of men like me to help balance the scales." Our mornings were a ritual of quiet intimacy. I would wake first, to the gentle pre-dawn light filtering through the linen curtains. I'd slip out of bed, careful not to disturb him, and go downstairs to the kitchen. The house would be still, holding its breath. I'd grind the coffee, Bianca's special dark roast from a small batch roaster he loved, and the aroma would slowly fill the space, a promise of the day to come. By the time the coffee was brewed, he would appear at the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, a soft smile on his face. He would wrap his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder, and we would stand there for a moment, just breathing together as the sun came up. "Morning, my archivist," he'd murmur into my hair. What history are we making today? Our life was a tapestry woven from such threads. We hosted dinner parties where the conversation was lively and intelligent, the wine flowed freely, and our friends would always leave saying, "You two are the gold standard." We took spontaneous trips to the coast, driving with the windows down, singing off-key to old songs on the radio. He would read to me at night, his voice a low, soothing rumble, turning the pages of whatever novel I was immersed in. He remembered the name of my childhood pet, the specific shade of blue that I loved, the way I took my tea. He saw me, or so I believed. He had built a fortress of affection and consideration around me, and I had felt so utterly, completely safe within its walls. I mistook the fortress for a home, never once suspecting that its true purpose was to be my prison. The first crack in the porcelain perfection of our life was almost imperceptible. A hairline fracture so fine you could only see it if the light hit it at just the right angle. It was a Tuesday evening, I remember, because Tuesdays were his late night at the office. A big project was launching, he'd said. He usually came home around 9 on those nights, tired but energized. He would tell me all about the challenges, the breakthroughs, the little office dramas. I loved hearing about his world. It felt like a testament to our partnership, that he would share that part of himself with me. But on this particular Tuesday, he didn't come home at 9 or 10. By 11, a knot of anxiety had begun to tighten in my stomach. It wasn't like him to be this late without a text. I called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. I told myself there were 1,000 reasonable explanations. His phone had died. He was stuck in a meeting that ran impossibly long. He was on his way home, caught in unexpected traffic. I paced the polished floor of our living room, the silence of the house suddenly feeling cavernous and accusatory. He finally walked in just after midnight. The relief that washed over me was so potent it almost erased my worry. But then I saw his face. It was a mask of strained nonchalance. "Hey," he said, his voice a little too bright. "Sorry, got completely buried. My phone died hours ago." He kissed me, but it was a fleeting, distracted gesture. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. "You must be exhausted," I said, reaching out to take his briefcase. "Let me get you something to eat." "No, I'm fine. I grabbed a bite with the team," he said, walking past me towards his study. "Just need to send one final email and I'm done for the day." Something was off. The way he avoided my gaze. The faint, unfamiliar scent on his jacket, not the sterile air of his office, but something else. Something like stale beer and cheap air freshener. And the lie, it was a small one, but it snagged in my mind. He hated eating late, especially the kind of greasy takeout food that teams usually order during a crunch. He was militant about his diet. I stood in the hallway, listening to the soft click of his study door closing. A door he rarely closed when I was home. The anxiety returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't worry for his safety. It was a colder, sharper feeling. A sliver of doubt. Later, as we lay in bed, the length of his body familiar and yet suddenly strange beside me, I tried to dismiss it. I was being paranoid. He was stressed. I was letting my imagination run away with me. I turned to him, wanting the reassurance of his touch, of his sleepy, affectionate murmur. Was the launch a success? I whispered into the darkness. There was a beat of silence, just a fraction of a second too long. "Yeah," he said, his voice flat. "Yeah, it was a huge success. We crushed it." He didn't elaborate. He didn't share the details, the triumphs, the small victories. He just rolled over, his back to me, and soon his breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, feeling the chill of that closed door seep into our bed. The first crack had appeared, and I had a sickening feeling that if I looked closely enough, I would find more. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in self-deception. I became an expert at finding excuses for the growing number of inconsistencies, the subtle shifts in the tectonic plates of our marriage. I wanted to believe in the life we had built. I wanted to believe in him. To admit that something was fundamentally wrong would mean that the foundation of my entire world was rotten, and I was not yet strong enough to face that possibility. The closed study door became a more frequent occurrence. When I asked about it, he was always ready with a plausible reason. "It's just a confidential call with legal, honey." Or, "I'm on a video conference with the European team. The time difference is a killer and I don't want to disturb you." He would say it with that easy, disarming smile, and I would nod, a hollow feeling echoing in my chest. I felt like a character in a play, reading my lines, while the real story was happening off stage. He became more guarded with his technology. His personal laptop, which used to lie open on the kitchen counter, was now always closed, always with him. His phone, which he used to leave on the nightstand between us, was now always face down or in his pocket. One evening I reached for it to check the time, a casual, thoughtless gesture we'd done 1,000 times before. He flinched. It was a small, sharp movement, but it was electric. He snatched the phone from the table before my fingers could even brush the screen. "I'll get it," he said, his voice tight. He glanced at the screen, then quickly shoved it into his pocket. The air between us crackled with a sudden, suffocating tension. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He forced a laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, of course. Just a ridiculous work email chain. You know how it is." He changed the subject then, asking about my day at the library, his tone once again warm and engaged. He was so good at it, the quick pivot, the redirection. He was a magician, and my trust was the object of his sleight of hand. Look here at my charming smile, at my attentive questions, and don't look there. At the secrets I'm hiding in plain sight. I started to notice a new kind of language creeping into his conversations, but only in unguarded moments. He had a group of friends from his firm, men he referred to as his inner circle. When they were over for drinks or when he was on the phone with them, a different Leo would emerge. A coarser, colder version. He'd make jokes about women that were cloaked in layers of irony, but the core of them was bitter. He'd talk about female colleagues in terms of their emotional volatility or their agenda. If I ever raised an eyebrow, he would immediately backtrack, winking at me. Oh, you know I'm just kidding, Alara. You know what I really think. And because I so desperately wanted to, I would let it go. The most jarring incident happened during a dinner with our closest friends, Mark and Sarah. Mark was one of Leo's partners at the firm. We were talking about a recent, very public story of a female journalist who had been subjected to a vicious online harassment campaign after publishing an exposé on a powerful executive. Sarah was expressing her disgust. "It's just vile," she said, her wine glass paused halfway to her lips. "The things they say, the way they dissect her life, her appearance. It's medieval." I agreed. It's designed to silence women, to make an example of her so others are too afraid to speak up. I glanced at Leo, expecting him to nod in fervent agreement, to add one of his well-rehearsed condemnations of misogyny. Instead, a strange, knowing smirk played on his lips. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair, "while the method is crude, you have to wonder what she did to provoke it. You don't get that level of blowback without poking the bear. Some of these women, they build their careers on being professional victims." The table fell silent. The words hung in the air, ugly and incongruous. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sarah stared at Leo, her mouth slightly agape. I felt the hot flush of shame creep up my neck. This was not my Leo. This was a stranger, spouting the talking points of the very trolls we despised. He must have seen the shock on our faces because he immediately went into damage control. "Whoa, hey, I'm just playing devil's advocate here," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Of course it's horrific. I'm just saying the world is complicated. There are always two sides to every story." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You know I'm on your side, Alara. Always." His touch felt like ice. For the rest of the evening I felt dissociated, observing the scene from a great distance. I watched him laugh and charm and smooth things over, and I saw the artifice for the first time. It was a performance, and a chillingly effective one. When Mark and Sarah left, their goodbyes were a little more subdued than usual. That night, the doubt was no longer a sliver. It was a shard of glass lodged deep inside me. The man who marched for women's rights, the man who quoted feminist theory, had just victim-blamed a woman in front of our friends. The contradiction was too stark to ignore. The perfect man was a construct, and the facade was beginning to crumble. I was standing in the ruins of what I thought was my life, and the dust was starting to settle, revealing something monstrous underneath. I knew with a certainty that terrified me that I had to find out what it was. I had to see the real face of the man sleeping beside me. My investigation did not begin with a frantic search or a dramatic confrontation. It began in the way I knew best. Quietly, methodically, like assembling a historical record from fragmented sources. I was an archivist, and my own life had become my most urgent, most terrifying project. I had to collate the evidence, establish a timeline, and cross-reference the facts until a coherent narrative emerged. The subject of my research was my husband, and the archive was our home. I started by observing. I became a student of his habits, his routines, his tells. I noted the exact times he would retreat to his study and close the door. It was almost always between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. I noticed that he had purchased a new laptop, a sleek, anonymous-looking black model. He never used it for his official work from the firm. That was all done on his company-issued silver laptop. This new one was his private device. He kept it in his study, and I never saw him use it for anything as mundane as browsing the news or shopping online. Its purpose was specific and it was secret. My first real breakthrough came from the most mundane of sources, the household finances. Leo handled our main accounts, a gesture he'd always framed as him taking on the boring stuff, so I could focus on my work and passions. I had my own account for my salary, but our major expenses, the mortgage, utilities, investments, all went through an account he managed. I had access, but I rarely looked at it, trusting him completely. That trust was now a liability. One Sunday afternoon, while he was out for his weekly long run, I sat down at our desktop computer in the kitchen. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel the pulse in my throat. I felt like a trespasser in my own home. I logged into our joint bank account. I scrolled through months of transactions, the familiar litany of our life together. Whole Foods, the mortgage payment, the fee for the wine club, a charge from a charming bookstore we'd visited on our last trip. It all looked so normal. I almost gave up, almost let the wave of guilt wash over me for my suspicion. But an archivist is trained to look for anomalies, for the entry that doesn't fit the pattern. And then I saw it. A recurring monthly charge. It wasn't for a large amount, just enough to be noticeable if you were looking for it. $49.99. The vendor name was cryptic. Blackwood Web Services. It wasn't a name I recognized. Not a subscription for a streaming service or a software he used for work. I searched the name online. The results were vague. Blackwood Web Services offered discreet, secure, offshore hosting solutions. Their marketing language was all about privacy, anonymity, and uncompromising free speech. It was the kind of service one would use if they didn't want what they were hosting to be easily traced. The charge had been happening for 2 years. 2 years. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a new development. This secret, whatever it was, had been living in our house, in our life, for 24 months. I felt a wave of nausea. All those perfect moments, those intimate conversations, those shared smiles, they had all occurred alongside this hidden parallel life he was leading. The next piece of the puzzle came a week later. Leo was in the shower. His new black laptop was on his desk in the study, and for once he had forgotten to close the lid completely. It was asleep but not shut down. I crept into the room, my stocking feet silent on the hardwood floor. My hands were shaking. I lifted the screen. The display flickered to life, showing his desktop. It was spartan, almost empty. There was no personal clutter, no photos of us, just the standard operating system icons, and a single saved document on the desktop. It was a text file, simply named Draft. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the sanctum. Clicked it open. The text that filled the screen was not a work document. It was not a letter. It was a post. A venomous, meticulously cruel post, written in a style I had never seen from Leo, yet it was undeniably his voice, twisted into a grotesque parody of itself. It was about a woman. Her full name was at the top. It detailed a recent promotion she had received at her job. The post systematically tore her apart. It called her ambition shrill, her confidence arrogance. It insinuated she had slept her way to the top. It commented on her appearance, her clothes, her marital status, her lack of children. It was a character assassination of the highest, most vicious order. But the most chilling part was the comment section that was copied and pasted below the draft. It seemed he was preparing this to be posted somewhere. The comments were from other men, egging him on. Classic case. She has that look in her eyes, you can just tell. Someone needs to put her back in her place. And Leo's own replies, under a pseudonym I didn't recognize, Oracle, were filled with the smug, superior tone. We see them for what they are, gentlemen. We are the watchers on the wall. I felt the blood drain from my face. I read the woman's name again. I knew her. Not well, but I knew her. She was a curator at a local art museum. I had met her at a few gallery openings. She was brilliant, passionate, and universally respected. To see her described in these vile, misogynistic terms by the man I loved, it was like my brain couldn't process it. I needed to know where this was being posted. I needed to see the website. My hands flew across the keyboard, my archival instincts taking over. I opened his browser. I went to his history. He was meticulous about clearing it, but he had missed one thing. In his frequently visited tabs there was a logo, not a name. It was a stark black and white image of a Greek column, broken in the middle. Clicked it. The page that loaded will be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. The name of the site was The Ledger. The tagline beneath it read, Veritas in Eternum. Truth in Eternity. It was a forum, a website, a digital pillory. The entire site was dedicated to shaming women. It was a vast, horrifying library of cruelty. There were sections for different professions. The academics, the executives, the artists, the journalists. Women were submitted for judgment. Their photos, their social media profiles, their places of work, their personal details were all posted. Then the men on the site would descend. I spent the next hour, it could have been a lifetime, navigating this cesspool. I saw women I recognized from the news, women from our own city, and countless others I didn't know, all reduced to targets. Their successes were reframed as betrayals of their natural roles. Their opinions were dismissed as hysteria. Their private photos were stolen and mocked. It wasn't just idle trolling. It was a coordinated effort to destroy reputations, to inflict real-world harm. I read stories in the comments of women who had lost their jobs, who had deleted their online presence entirely, who had been forced to move. And at the center of it all was the administrator, the one they all revered, the one who set the tone, who wrote the most eloquent, most poisonous posts, the one who used the pseudonym Oracle. I went back to the user profiles. I clicked on Oracle. The profile page was simple. It listed his status, administrator, founder, and his join date 2 years ago, the exact same month as the first charge from Blackwood Web Services. The water in the upstairs bathroom shut off. Leo was done with his shower. I closed the laptop, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked out of the study, closing the door softly behind me. I went to the kitchen and stood by the window, looking out at the serene, leafy street. The world outside looked exactly the same, but my own world had been inverted. The man I had built my life with, the man I had trusted with my heart, my body, and my dreams, was the architect of this monument to hatred. My perfect, feminist husband was Oracle. He was the king of this squalid, shadowy kingdom. And I, his loving wife, had been sleeping soundly next to him every single night while he sharpened his knives. The fortress he had built around me wasn't to keep me safe. It was to ensure he had a perfect alibi. The days that followed the discovery were a study in dissociation. I moved through my life as if submerged in deep water. Sounds were muffled, colors were dull, and every action required a monumental effort. I was living a double life just as he was. On the surface, I was still Alara, the loving wife. I made his coffee in the morning. I asked about his day. I smiled when he kissed me. But beneath that placid surface, a glacier of cold, silent rage was forming. His touch, which had once been my greatest comfort, now felt like a violation. When his hand rested on the small of my back, I had to physically restrain myself from flinching. When he said, "I love you," before falling asleep, the words landed in the silence of the room like stones thrown into a well. I would lie beside him in the dark, my body rigid, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, and I would picture him sitting in his study, bathed in the ghoulish blue light of his laptop screen, typing out his latest decree of hate as Oracle. The two images, the loving husband and the vicious administrator, were impossible to reconcile. My mind kept trying to merge them, to find some connecting tissue, but they remained stubbornly, terrifyingly separate. It was this duality, I realized, that made him so monstrous. He wasn't just a simple misogynist. He was a master of deception. He wore his feminism like a perfectly tailored suit, a disguise that allowed him to move through the world not just unchallenged but celebrated. He had built his public persona as a shield for his private depravity. My work at the library became my only refuge. The silence of the archives, the scent of old paper, the weight of history in my handset was all grounding. I would lose myself for hours cataloging collections of letters from the 19th century, tracing the lives of women who had faced their own forms of societal constraint and injustice. Their stories, written in elegant, looping cursive, spoke to me across the decades. They had endured. They had found ways to resist, to survive, to carve out their own spaces in a world that sought to confine them. Their quiet strength fueled a tiny flickering flame within me. During my lunch breaks, and in the stolen moments late at night after he was asleep, my real work began. I returned to the ledger, not as a horrified spectator but as an archivist. My mission was no longer just to understand, it was to document. I began to build a case against him, against all of them. I created a secure, encrypted drive, hidden on a library computer that I knew was not monitored. I started to systematically save everything. I took screenshots of the most egregious posts. I downloaded the pages that contained doxing information, names, addresses, employers. I copied and pasted the threads where men planned coordinated harassment campaigns against their targets. I documented every single post made by Oracle, saving them in a separate folder. I studied his language, his syntax, his recurring phrases. It was him. The cadence was a dark mirror of the way he spoke when he was trying to be intellectually impressive at dinner parties. I created a spreadsheet. In the first column, I listed the pseudonyms of the most active and vicious users on the site. In the subsequent columns, I began to gather information. I became a digital detective. I read through their entire post histories, looking for slips, for personal details they might have inadvertently revealed. A mention of a specific city, a complaint about a local sports team, a reference to their profession. It was painstaking work, like piecing together a shattered mosaic. Some of them were careless. One user, who went by the name Lichter22, often complained about the terrible traffic on a specific freeway in the Seattle area. In another post, he mentioned his work in software sales. Another, Brutus_X, made a detailed post about his recent bitter divorce, and in his anger, he mentioned the specific model of his ex-wife's car, a somewhat uncommon convertible. Slowly, I began to build profiles. They were not just anonymous trolls. They were real men with jobs and families and lives in the sunlit world. They were lawyers, doctors, tech executives, university professors. And many of them, I discovered with a sickening jolt, were in Leo's professional and social orbit. I recognized names of companies, and in a few cases I could make an educated guess at their true identities. Mark, our friend, the one who had looked so uncomfortable at dinner that night? His online persona, I was 90% certain, was Gilded_Cage, a prolific commenter who specialized in demeaning women in finance. The scope of it was staggering. This wasn't just my husband's private hobby. It was a network, a brotherhood of poison, and Leo was their leader. He was the one they looked up to, the one who provided the intellectual framework for their hatred. His posts were often long pseudo-philosophical essays on the natural order of things, on the dangers of unchecked female ambition. He was their high priest. The more I uncovered, the more my grief and shock began to transmute into something else. It was a cold, clear, and focused anger. It was the anger of an archivist who sees a precious collection being destroyed by vandals. These women's lives, their stories, their reputations, they were the collection. And I would not stand by and watch them be burned. The turning point came one evening. I was in my study, the one room in the house that still felt like my own. I was reading a news article about a young, brilliant astrophysicist who had recently withdrawn from public life. She had been a rising star, known for her accessible and enthusiastic science communication on social media. The article stated she had deleted all her accounts and withdrawn from a major conference due to intense online harassment. The vagueness of the phrase was maddening. On a hunch, I went to the ledger. I searched her name, and there she was. She had been one of their recent major targets. It had been led by Oracle, my husband. He had written a post dissecting an interview she had given, twisting her words, calling her a fraud who used her looks to get attention. The post had unleashed the horde. They had found her address. They had sent threats to her university. They had made her life a living hell. Reading it, I felt something snap inside me. The last vestiges of the woman who had loved Leo, the woman who had wanted to believe in him, died in that moment. She was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone forged in the icy fire of betrayal. My quiet sadness was gone, replaced by a diamond-hard resolve. I was not going to expose him to save my marriage. The marriage was already a corpse. I was not going to do it for revenge, not in the hot-blooded sense of the word. This was about justice. It was about dismantling the entire rotten structure, brick by poisonous brick. He had built an engine of destruction. I was going to turn it back on him. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I was an archivist, not a hacker. I could gather the data, but I needed someone who could wield it. I needed someone who could break into the fortress and turn on all the lights. I closed the article about the astrophysicist. I closed the ledger. I opened a new secure browser window. My search was no longer for answers about my husband. My search was for weapons. And I had a feeling I knew where to find them. I began to search for the digital ghosts who fought back. The white hat hackers. The ones who hunted men like my husband. My war was about to begin. Finding the right people was the most delicate phase of my operation. I couldn't simply post a request on a public forum. The world of hacking, even the ethical side of it, is built on layers of trust, verification, and anonymity. A clumsy approach would not only fail, it could expose me to Leo or his network. I had to use my own skills, research, patience, and the ability to follow a trail of breadcrumbs to find my way in. My search began in the dark corners of the internet where victims of online harassment gathered for support. I lurked in subreddits and encrypted chat groups, places where people shared their stories and sought advice. I never posted, I just read. I was looking for a pattern, a name, a whisper of a group that did more than just offer sympathy. I was looking for a group that took action. After weeks of sifting through thousands of posts, I found it. It was a recurring, almost legendary name, mentioned only in hushed, grateful tones. Athena's Shield. They were never mentioned directly. It was always allusions. A friend put me in touch with the Shield. Or Athena's people took care of it. From what I could piece together, they were a collective of white hat hackers, cybersecurity experts, and digital activists. They specialized in helping victims of severe, targeted online harassment, particularly when the perpetrators were well hidden and the legal system was too slow or ill-equipped to help. They didn't seek money or fame. Their only payment was justice. Finding them was one thing. Contacting them was another. There was no website, no public email address. They were a ghost in the machine. I realized my way in wouldn't be through a direct approach. It had to be through a trusted node. I went back to my own archive, the vast database of pain I had compiled from the ledger. I began to cross-reference the victims on the site with public lists of women in tech, cybersecurity, and digital rights advocacy. My hypothesis was that Athena's Shield would likely have a connection to, or even be composed of people who understood this world intimately, perhaps because they themselves had been targets. My search led me to a woman named Dr. Eris Thorne. Her name wasn't on the ledger, but the names of several of her prominent colleagues were. Dr. Thorne was a leading cryptographer and a fierce, outspoken advocate for online privacy. She had given several talks, which I watched online, about the weaponization of data and the need for digital self-defense. In one Q&A, someone asked her what a person should do if they were being targeted by a sophisticated, anonymous entity. Her answer was careful but pointed. "The system is not always designed to protect the individual," she had said. "Sometimes you need to find a better system. Build your own shields. Or find the people who carry them." It was a clear signal. I knew contacting her directly would be a risk. I needed a pretext, a legitimate reason to be in touch. My job, for the first time, provided the perfect cover. Our library had recently acquired the papers of a pioneering female computer scientist from the 1960s. It was a significant collection. I drafted a professional, formal email to Dr. Thorne, introducing myself as an archivist from the city library. I explained that we were processing this collection, and given her expertise in the history of cryptography and women in computing, I wondered if she might be willing to consult on a small part of the project. It was a legitimate, professional request. It was also my Trojan horse. She responded 2 days later. Her email was polite, professional, and slightly cautious. She agreed to a brief video call to discuss the project. The day of the call, I set up in a private study room at the library. My hands were clammy, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. When her face appeared on my screen, I saw a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of calm authority. We spoke for 20 minutes about the archive, about the woman's coded journals, about the challenges of preserving digital history. I could tell she was vetting me, testing my knowledge, my seriousness. I answered her questions precisely, drawing on my genuine passion for my work. Finally, as we were about to end the call, I took a breath. "Dr. Thorne," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. "There is another reason I sought you out. This is of a more personal and sensitive nature. It concerns a matter of digital security and a group of individuals who are using technology to cause significant harm." Her expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. A deep, knowing attention. She was listening. "Go on," she said. "I have come into possession of a significant amount of data," I continued, choosing my words with the care of a diplomat. "It pertains to a highly organized, anonymous website dedicated to the defamation and harassment of women. The administrator of this site is a man I know intimately. The evidence I have is comprehensive. It includes server details, financial records, and a near-complete list of the primary users and their activities. I have the ledger." I let the last sentence hang in the air. I saw her absorb the information. Her gaze was intense. She was no longer a polite academic. She was the expert I had been searching for. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice low and serious. "I am the wife of the man who created it," I said simply. There was no point in hiding it. The truth was the only currency I had. Silence stretched for a long moment. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. Then she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "You will receive an email in the next hour from a secure address," she said. "Follow the instructions exactly. Do not use your home computer or your personal network for any further communication. From now on, you operate from the shadows. Welcome to the Resistance, Alara." The call ended. I sat in the silent study room, the weight of her words settling over me. I was no longer alone. I had found the shield, and now the war could truly begin. The email arrived 57 minutes later. It contained no text, only a string of characters and a link to an encrypted messaging platform. The instructions were clear. Create a new account using a specific protocol, destroy all evidence of this email, and await contact. I followed the protocol to the letter, my archivist's mind finding a strange comfort in the precision of the steps. I named my anonymous profile Cassandra. Felt fitting. I was the prophetess whose warnings were never believed, but whose truths would bring down a kingdom. My contact in Athena Shield was a user named Nyx. I never learned their real name, their gender, or their location. They were a ghost in the code, their words appearing on my screen in stark, unadorned text. Our initial conversations were a rigorous interrogation. Nyx wanted to know everything. How did I get the data? How could I be sure of its authenticity? What was my motive? They tested me, probed for weaknesses, for any hint of entrapment or emotional instability. They needed to be certain I was not a liability. I understood their caution. I methodically laid out my case, providing them with samples of the data I had collected, redacted to protect the victims but clear enough to prove its value. I shared the financial records from Blackwood Web Services. I detailed my process for identifying the other users. I explained in a calm and detached tone my relationship with Oracle. I was not a woman scorned, I told them. I was an archivist with a duty to the historical record, and this was an act of preservation, preserving the safety and dignity of the women in the ledger by eradicating the source of their pain. My professionalism, my detached and methodical approach, seemed to win their trust. After a week of intense vetting, Nyx's tone changed. "The council has reviewed your information," the message read. "Your case has been accepted. We will help you. We have one condition." "What is it?" I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. "You are the source. You are the client. You determine the outcome. We are your instrument. We can dismantle the site, expose the users, ruin them financially, professionally, personally. We can burn their entire world to the ground and salt the earth. You must tell us what justice looks like to you." The question was immense. For a moment, the cold, controlled anger I had cultivated threatened to break, to be replaced by a raw, guttural desire for pure destruction. I wanted to see Leo's world reduced to ashes. I wanted him to feel a fraction of the humiliation and fear he had inflicted on so many. But I reined it in. Hot-headed revenge was messy. It could have unintended consequences, and it could cause more harm to the victims. The goal was not just to punish. It was to deliver a precise, inescapable, and righteous consequence. It had to be clean. It had to be irrefutable. It had to be a masterpiece of justice. I spent 2 days drafting my response to my proposal. It was the most important document I had ever written. Here is what justice looks like. I finally wrote to Nix. Phase 1, the archive. You will gain access to the server. You will make a complete, verified, and incorruptible copy of the entire website. Every post, every comment, every private message, every user IP address, every registration detail. This is the master archive. It is our evidence. Phase 2, the takedown. Once the archive is secure, you will wipe the site from the Blackwood servers. Not just delete it, obliterate it. Erase every trace of its existence from their systems. It must be as if it never was. Phase 3, the reckoning. This is the most important part. We will not simply dump the data online. That would re-victimize the women on the site. The disclosure must be surgical. We will create tailored packages of information for 3 distinct audiences. Package A, for law enforcement. A complete, unredacted copy of the master archive, along with a detailed report highlighting all instances of illegal activity, doxing, credible threats of violence, stalking, and any potential evidence of revenge porn distribution. This will be delivered anonymously to federal and state cybercrime divisions. Package B, for the media. A curated selection of the evidence. We will provide it to a small hand-picked group of trusted female journalists who have a track record of reporting on these issues with sensitivity and integrity. This package will focus on the ringleader, Oracle, my husband, Leo, and his prominent, powerful friends. It will expose the hypocrisy of these public-facing men. It will tell the story of the ledger, but the identities of the victims will be protected. Their stories told only with implied consent or through public records. Package C, the personal consequence. This is for the men of the ledger. For each of the top 100 most active users I have identified, we will prepare a private file. This file will contain a complete record of their activity on the site, every post, every comment they ever made. And we will send it encrypted to one person, their wife, their long-term partner, or if they have neither, their mother. The women in their lives deserve to know who they are sleeping next to. Finally, for my husband, for Oracle, I have a special requirement. The disclosures for Package B and C must be timed to go live at a precise moment. And I must be the one to tell him. Nix's response came back within minutes. A formidable plan, Cassandra. We approve. We will begin work immediately. Let us know the date and time for the final disclosure. We will be ready. Athena's shield is at your side. I leaned back in my chair in the quiet library, the messages glowing on the screen. My plan was in motion. The gears of justice were beginning to turn. For the next few weeks, I lived on a knife's edge, maintaining the facade of the loving wife while my invisible army worked in the digital trenches. I watched Leo, studied him as he moved through our perfect life, completely oblivious. He was a dead man walking. He just didn't know it yet. He thought he was the Oracle, the all-seeing eye. He had no idea that a far more patient, far more relentless gaze was fixed upon him, and judgment was coming. The 2 weeks leading up to what I internally called the reckoning were the most surreal of my life. I was an actor playing the part of myself, a ghost haunting the rooms of my own home. I performed the rituals of our marriage with a chilling, detached precision. I made breakfast. I arranged flowers in the vase on the mantelpiece. I listened to his stories about work, nodding and smiling in all the right places, all while my secret allies were mapping the architecture of his digital soul and preparing the charges that would blow it apart. The communication with Nix was sparse but efficient. They sent me updates in short, cryptic messages. Archive secured. Server access established. Packages are being prepared. Each message was a small, satisfying click of a lock falling into place. They were a silent, ruthlessly competent force, and my trust in them was absolute. I chose the date for the reckoning carefully. It was a Thursday. Thursday was the day of the annual gala for Leo's tech firm, a lavish event where he would be celebrated. He was set to receive a prestigious Visionary of the Year award for his leadership and, ironically, for his work in promoting a safe and inclusive corporate culture. The timing was poetic. His greatest public triumph would coincide with his ultimate private ruin. I told Nix the date and the exact time: Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That would be precisely when Leo was scheduled to be on stage, giving his acceptance speech. The day of the gala arrived, a crisp, clear autumn afternoon. Leo was ecstatic, buzzing with a nervous, self-important energy. He spent the afternoon on the phone talking to his colleagues, to his PR person, to his parents. He was a man at the absolute peak of his life, blissfully unaware of the abyss that was about to open up beneath him. "You look breathtaking, Alara," he said as I came downstairs that evening. He was standing at the bottom of the staircase, already in his tuxedo, looking every bit the celebrated Visionary. I was wearing a simple, elegant black dress. It felt appropriate, like I was in mourning for the man I thought he was, and for the woman I used to be. I had done my hair and makeup with meticulous care. I needed to look calm. I needed to look unshakable. "You look very handsome, Leo," I said, my voice even. In the car on the way to the gala, he took my hand. His was warm and dry. Mine was ice cold. "Are you proud of me?" he asked, his voice soft, fishing for the validation he always craved. I turned to look at him. I looked into his stormy eyes, the eyes I had once thought held the universe. And for the first time, I let him see a flicker of the truth. I didn't smile. "I think by the end of tonight, everyone will see you for exactly who you are," I said. My tone was flat, devoid of warmth. He looked momentarily confused, a slight frown creasing his brow. "What a strange thing to say," he murmured. But then the car pulled up to the Grand Hotel where the gala was being held, and the flash of paparazzi cameras distracted him. The moment was lost. He was back in his element, smiling, waving, the celebrated man of the hour. We entered the ballroom. It was a sea of tuxedos and gowns, of glittering jewelry and the clinking of champagne glasses. The air was thick with perfume and self-congratulation. I saw Mark and his wife Sarah and several of the other men I now knew from the Ledger, all of them laughing, drinking, completely at ease. They were pillars of their community. Tonight, those pillars would crumble into dust. I endured the cocktail hour, the dinner, the endless speeches. I was a serene island in a turbulent sea of anticipation. I nursed a single glass of water, my eyes occasionally flicking to the clock. At 7:55 p.m., I excused myself from the table. "I'm just going to the powder room," I whispered to Leo. He squeezed my arm, his eyes already on the stage, his mind on his impending speech. I didn't go to the powder room. I found a quiet, empty alcove in the hallway, overlooking the city lights. I took out my phone. I had one message from Nix sent moments before. "All systems are go, Cassandra. On your command." I took a deep breath. I looked at the clock on my phone. 7:59 p.m. I could hear the master of ceremonies inside the ballroom begin Leo's introduction, his voice booming with effusive praise. "A true leader, a champion of progress. My friend Leo Vance." Applause erupted from the ballroom. This was it. I typed my reply to Nix. A single word. Execute. I imagined it then, a silent global cascade. I pictured a female journalist in New York, her phone buzzing with the arrival of a massive, encrypted file. I pictured a cybercrime agent in a sterile government office, an automated alert flagging a file that had just been anonymously dropped into their digital evidence locker. And I pictured dozens of women in their living rooms, in their bedrooms across the country. Wives, girlfriends, mothers. I saw them checking their email, seeing a message from an anonymous source with the subject line, "The man you think you know." I saw them opening the file and seeing the ugly, undeniable truth about the men they loved, written in their own words. I saw Sarah, Mark's wife, her face paling as she read the vile things her husband had said about his female colleagues. I saw the world of these men cracking one by one. I walked back into the ballroom just as Leo stepped up to the podium. He was beaming, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight. He looked out at the adoring crowd. He looked invincible. "Thank you," he began, his voice resonant with emotion. "I am so incredibly humbled." And then it started. A faint vibration at first. The man sitting at the table next to mine, a senior partner at another firm, pulled out his phone, a frown on his face. Then another person. And another. A low murmur began to spread through the room. A ripple of digital distraction. Leo, in his bubble of light on the stage, didn't notice at first. He continued with his speech, talking about vision, about integrity. Then Mark, who was sitting at a table near the front, suddenly stood up, his face ashen. He stared at his phone, then looked at Leo on the stage with an expression of pure horror. He turned and practically ran from the ballroom. His wife Sarah was staring at her own phone, tears streaming down her face. Now the murmur was growing louder. Phones were out everywhere. People were whispering, showing their screens to one another. The applause for Leo's speech had died. The adoring faces had been replaced by a sea of confusion, of shock, of dawning disgust. Leo finally faltered. He could feel the shift in the room. The energy had curdled. He looked out, his smile wavering. As I was saying, he tried to continue, but his voice was drowned out by the rising tide of whispers. His own phone, which he had placed on the podium, began to buzz. Then it buzzed again. And again. A relentless, frantic series of notifications. The news alerts were breaking. Tech visionary Leo Vance exposed as administrator of vile misogynistic website. His PR person was desperately trying to get his attention from the wings of the stage, his face a mask of panic. Leo picked up his phone. He looked at the screen. And I watched as the color drained from his face. I watched as the celebrated man, the visionary, the perfect husband, evaporated in the glare of 1,000 tiny screens. All that was left was a hollow man, exposed and terrified, standing alone in a spotlight that now felt like an interrogation lamp. He looked out into the crowd, his eyes wild, searching. He was looking for me. I was standing at the back of the room near the exit. Our eyes met across the chaos. I didn't smile. I didn't glare. I simply held his gaze, my expression perfectly, terrifyingly neutral. I wanted my face to be the last thing he saw before his world ended. I wanted him to know, in that final silent moment of communication, that it was me. I was the architect of his ruin. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. The entire artifice of his life, so meticulously constructed, had been brought down not by a thunderous explosion, but by a quiet, steady, and inescapable truth. I held his gaze for a beat longer. Then I turned and without a backward glance, I walked out of the ballroom, out of the hotel, and out of the life we had built together. I left him in the ruins. I didn't go back to the brownstone. There was nothing for me there. I had packed a single bag weeks ago, filled with my essentials, and stored it in a locker at the train station. I retrieved it and checked into an anonymous hotel across town. A place with no history, no memories. I turned off my phone. I didn't want to see the news. I didn't need to. I had written the story. I didn't need to read the reviews. The silence of the hotel room was a balm. For the first time in months, there was no secret humming beneath the floorboards. No lie breathing next to me in the dark. There was only me, and the quiet, clean slate of my future. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel elation. I felt a profound and deeply satisfying sense of peace. It was the peace of a librarian who has finally restored a damaged, precious text. It was the quiet satisfaction of an archivist who has brought a hidden, terrible history into the light. Justice, I had learned, was not about passion. It was about order. It was about balancing the ledger. In the weeks that followed, I pieced together the fallout from a safe distance, through news reports and the occasional encrypted message from Nix. Leo was, of course, fired. His Visionary of the Year award was rescinded. He was facing multiple lawsuits from the women he had targeted. His powerful friends, the other members of the ledger, were suffering similar fates. Marriages ended. Careers imploded. Reputations were permanently destroyed. The network was shattered. Athena's shield had done their work with surgical precision. I never spoke to Leo again. His lawyer contacted mine. The divorce was swift and silent. He didn't contest anything. He gave me the house, the accounts, everything. I suppose he thought that material things could atone for the spiritual damage he had inflicted. I sold the house without ever stepping foot inside it again. I gave a significant portion of the money to a nonprofit that supported victims of online harassment. Felt right. It was a way of closing the circle. I moved to a small coastal town, a place where the air smells of salt and the rhythm of life is dictated by the tides. I found a job at a local historical society, a quiet place filled with the stories of sailors and fishermen. It is a peaceful life. True life. Sometimes, late at night, when the fog rolls in from the ocean and wraps the town in a silent embrace, I think about that other life. I think about the man who quoted bell hooks and the man who called himself Oracle. And I realized they were never two separate people. They were one. The shiny, perfect facade was not a mask. It was a necessary component of the cruelty. The public performance of virtue is what gave him the license for his private vice. He needed the light to cast such a dark shadow. I don't hate him anymore. Hate is a fire that consumes the person who holds it. What I feel is a kind of cold, distant pity. He was a man so hollow inside that he had to fill himself up with the pain of others. He built a kingdom of lies and sat on a throne of contempt. And in the end he was its only true prisoner. My revenge was not in his destruction but in my own survival. It was in the quiet act of dismantling his world and then walking away to build my own. A world based not on perfection but on truth. I am the archivist of my own story now. And it is a story of a woman who stepped out of the ruins, brushed the dust from her shoulders, and began again. So, I leave you with this question. Have you ever discovered a side to someone you thought you knew? A side so dark it made you question everything? What do you do when the person you love becomes the monster in your story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read them all. And if this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribing to her revenge arc for more stories of justice, reclaimed. Until next time, be watchful, be brave, and be the author of your own ending.